If you put the chaotic, overlapping puzzle of European kingdoms and empires from before 1789 right next to the modern map of Europe, the contrast is stark. On the left, dynastic territory shifts based on royal marriages and inheritance. On the right, you see the sharp, distinct lines of the nation-states we recognize today. Before those modern lines were drawn, society was rigidly locked into class systems. Identity was defined entirely by rank, whether as a noble, a member of the clergy, or a commoner. They owed loyalty to a monarch, viewing themselves as subjects of a crown rather than a unified public. The 1789 French Revolution shattered this hierarchy by introducing the concept of the citizen. It established the radical idea that people were equal members of a shared nation, and that sovereignty belonged to them, not to a king. In 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte took power. As his armies swept across the continent, they carried these revolutionary concepts through the fog of war, imposing legal equality and constitutional reforms on every territory they occupied. But this created an immediate irony. Subjugated people in Germany, Italy, and Poland quickly adopted the French ideas of liberty and citizenship, then used those same ideas to challenge the French occupation, demanding the right to rule themselves as sovereign nations. The idea of nationalism was now an unstoppable force, threatening the very foundations of the world's ancient, rigid empires. Following Napoleon's defeat in 1815, Europe's elite leaders met at the Congress of Vienna. Their objective was simple: restore the old monarchies, suppress any revolutionary movements, and force the genie back into the bottle. The effort to contain the movement failed almost immediately. In the 1820s, Greeks fought for and won independence from the Ottoman Empire. By 1830, Belgium successfully broke away from the Netherlands to form its own state. This diagram illustrates exactly how fast the movement scaled. In what became known as the Springtime of Nations in 1848, simultaneous uprisings ignited across France, Austria, Germany, Italy, and Hungary. Millions of people hit the streets, demanding constitutional rights and national self-determination. In this early phase, nationalism operated as a tool for the underdog. It was a grassroots weapon used by ordinary people to dismantle absolute rule. By the late 1850s, the dynamic flipped. Shrewd state leaders realized they could co-opt nationalist sentiment to centralize their own power and expand their reach. In a fractured Italian peninsula, Giuseppe Garibaldi utilized a combination of careful diplomacy, targeted wars, and popular uprisings to stitch dozens of smaller states into a single unified kingdom of Italy by 1861. In the splintered German-speaking world, Otto von Bismarck deployed a strategy of blood and iron to force unification upon dozens of independent states. This archival image captures the scale of the military machine Bismarck built. By orchestrating 3 calculated wars against Denmark, Austria, and France, he forged the separate states into the German Empire in 1871, establishing a powerful new European state. Nationalism had matured into a mechanical, top-down tool used by leaders to construct highly centralized empires. After 1871, the psychology in nationalism shifted away from liberation and toward aggression. The primary narrative was no longer about winning freedom, but about asserting the cultural and military superiority of one's own nation over its neighbors. Superiority drove vicious imperial competition. European nations aggressively claimed colonies across Africa and Asia. As these identities became exclusive, they turned open borders into fortified defenses, viewing neighbors as existential rivals. By the turn of the century, the constant friction between these competing empires was generating more heat than the existing diplomatic systems could handle. Between 1900 and 1914, the Balkans emerged as the ultimate powder keg. It was an unstable region where multiple ethnic groups, including Serbs, Bulgarians, and Romanians, sought to carve out independent nations from the territory of the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires. The tension finally snapped on June 28, 1914, with the assassination of the man in this portrait, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The assassin was Gavrilo Princip, a man whose localized act of extreme nationalism lit the fuse for a global conflict. Because of the deeply entrenched national rivalries and military alliances that had hardened over the previous 40 years, this single event instantly dragged the entire continent into an industrial meat grinder. The scale of the war's destruction was staggering. Millions of people died in the trenches, and by the time the fighting stopped, 4 massive entities, the Russian, German, Ottoman, and Austro-Hungarian empires, had completely collapsed. In 1919, the map of Europe was completely redrawn. Out of the ruins of the old empires, new countries like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Finland were born, established on the principle of national self-determination. It leaves us with a stark paradox. Nationalism remains a powerful engine for building cohesive, free societies, but when it is stripped of civic rights and married to exclusion, it has proven capable of dismantling the very stability it once promised.